Welcome to the meeting of the NICER's Subcommittee on Proxies. Before we begin, I'd like to just go around the room and have everyone acknowledge themselves for the record. Rebecca, we'll start with you.
Rebecca, your Comptroller's Office.
John Adler, Mayor's Office of Pensions and Investments.
Ray Santander, District Council 37.
John Dorsey, Controller's Office.
Pat Stryker, Teamsters.
Larry Schimel, representing Tish James, Public Advocate.
Michael Garland, Controller's Office.
Mel Sandwood, Controller's Office.
And Scott Dresel, Controller's Office.
Before we begin, I'd just like to point out that this meeting is being conducted under the Open Meetings Law, and the Comptroller's Office is the convener of this meeting and not a member of the NICER's Proxy Committee. I just wanted to state that before we begin. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Garland, the Assistant Controller, to discuss today's agenda.
Great, thank you, John. The first item on the agenda is to review and approve revised proxy voting guidelines. I think people have been talking about this for some time, and this is a direct follow-up to the February 3rd meeting. So you have, and there are copies here if you haven't had a chance to review them, a cover memo detailing some of the changes since the February 3rd meeting, and then a red-lined and clean copy of the guidelines. Prior to February 3rd, we shared a document with you. The red lines here show all the changes since the first version we shared, and those are summarized on the cover here, and we did reflect input provided by trustees at that meeting and other input that we've received. The most significant changes since what you saw the first time are in response to some comments that were raised during that meeting. We've elaborated on the history of the funds because we wanted to make sure in putting out a new document that we'd include some of the historical context that had built up over several decades in the original document. And then I think some of the most significant highlights are building out the expectations around director qualifications, and with explicit mention of climate risk competence and human capital. And some of you may have seen that CalPERS also recently updated their proxy voting guidelines to reference those items. And actually that CalPERS action was in direct response to a meeting that Controller Stringer and the French ambassador to the UN convened a couple months ago. The California Controller and California Treasurer were there. There was a discussion about board competencies. So we're aligned. And the request from the California elected fiduciaries also went to CalSTRS. So we expect to see something out of their guidelines possibly at some point. And then just stepping back overall, and our objective here is to move from a very rules-based granular set of proxy voting guidelines to a more principles-based document. I know we've had fairly extensive discussions in it the last meeting, so happy to answer questions or go into greater detail depending on how the committee wants to proceed.
I mean, I'd just like to say that what we're hoping to accomplish today is an endorsement of these guidelines for the full board that will bring a suite of items related to proxy voting to the appropriate NICER's regular meeting to vote on. So we just wanted to make sure that the proxy committee is comfortable with the guideline changes, and we'll endorse that when we go before the full board.
Right. So our understanding, by the way, is under the IPS, this committee has the authority to approve these guidelines subject to ratification by the full board. The agenda items that we're going to deal with in executive session, we're really just looking for an endorsement for a recommendation to the full board because the committee does not have the authority to act.
So if there's no questions on this item, we'll invite a motion to go into executive session to discuss
Well, don't we have to move
endorsement?
I'm sorry. A recommendation to the full board to adopt the suggested the draft of the amended proxy guidelines.
Okay.
So I
have a
will
motion.
move it. Yes.
And we have a second. All in favor of accepting the guideline recommendation?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So at this time, I think we invite a motion to move into executive session.
Before we move into
I'm
executive
sorry.
session, just a couple of things. If I'm happy to do an informal update on where we are in public session on the proxy season or other issues, if you want to be, or we can move right to the specific business items. I figured we have the opportunity
Yeah.
to have you here.
May I interrupt to
Yes.
say that I think that we should acknowledge that Mike Garland is now on the board of the Council of Institutional Investors.
Yeah.
Been elected, duly elected.
Congratulations.
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 Thank you. In fact,
I would actually just like to say before we move off the item, that I would like to recognize the work that Mike and Scott and the entire corporate governance team has done I know it's a lot of work to really modernize our proxy voting guidelines, and I really appreciate it. And I think I probably speak for the rest of the board.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You're here.
Absolutely.
And echoing it, saying, I think the net effect will be a much more effective program, and people will have clear ideas of how we're going to vote on things. And this is really a step in the right direction. And you have really, all of you, done a great job.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to do this relatively informally, but we'll come back to you in the fall with a postseason report on the shareholder initiatives. But as you know, virtually the entire engagement capacity has been focused on proxy access, and just to give people a flavor of how the big campaign last year, which was contentious and involved the SEC, but how dramatically the landscape has shifted. Last year, ICERS and the other systems filed 75 proxy access proposals. We reached negotiated settlements on 7, which is a very low settlement rate. And as people know, the voting support was overwhelmingly strong, average majority support. This season, we've we've properly filed about 70 proposals, half of which are refiles from prior year's companies. So 70 proposals. I think we're on track to withdraw roughly 50 of them. So we'll likely have about 20 to go to a vote, which is just a night and day in terms of the way companies are responding. Last year it was debating with companies about this is something we think they ought to do.
You're going to put yourself out of business.
Yeah, we represented this as a multi-year initiative. It may wind up sooner, but really it was a first step toward board quality. Thank you. Yes. So now it's really, it's the boring minutia of what constitutes a meaningful bylaw. That's what we're spending our time on the phone about.
So Mike, with the 50 agreements, settlements, and I know there were settlements both during and after the proxy season last year, what do you estimate will be the number of companies with meaningful proxy access at the end of this proxy season?
Well, let me give you some factual numbers, and then we can do a little more prediction. When we launched in November of 2014, there were at most 6 companies that had a 3% bylaw. Today, it's over 212.
Wow.
And not all of those were our focus companies, but I can tell you none of it would have happened had we not broken through and built a coalition of investors and got to the SEC. So I think that New York City's leadership, which is recognized and with tremendous support from other big investors, really changed the dynamic on something that has been very aggressively opposed by the corporate community for a very, very long time. So, and it's strengthened, I think, it's significantly strengthened already good relationships with peers, and I think it's enhanced our credibility with portfolio companies. I mean, they call us in response to all kinds of things now, I think, to them. So there's been a lot of collateral benefit.
Mike, I understand, obviously you're negotiating with the remaining 20, so you may not want to disclose this, but is there any specific companies that stand out as being the most resistant towards this initiative?
And I just want to remind you, we are going to go into executive session.
Right.
Mike, if you feel that
If you
there's
feel more
stuff
comfortable.
I'm comfortable, I think, because it's generally public what's going to a vote. At this point, for the companies we focused on, most of it is baked in essentially. There are a couple companies that have not yet sent us an opposition statement because they have a later meeting. But I think that there are several meetings that stand out. There's Exxon, because it's one of our largest holdings. We received 49.4% vote last year. They are alone among their peers, large oil and gas companies, in not enacting proxy access. Other focus companies where we got lower than 49.4% went ahead and enacted a bylaw. And so I think that's important. I think the change that was announced by Vanguard, where they now support 3% instead of 5%, bodes particularly well for the vote, but nothing is a given. And also, the context, we focused on Exxon because of the concerns about climate competence in the boardroom, the diversity in the boardroom, and there was a report that came out of Oxford University that talked about Exxon having the least diverse board among the 10 major oil and gas companies in the world. And when I say diverse, this is industry experience, gender, tenure, age. It isn't just racial and gender diversity, but the kind of diverse perspectives that you want the boardroom. So Exxon, and it not only stands out among its peers, but most of the largest companies, say in the US, starting with Apple, have proxy access. Other priorities, I think Netflix, we received 70% support last year. They're the only example I'm clearly aware of where we got a majority vote and the company has not taken action. They're actually intending to go to a vote one more time. Chipotle, where we both received 49.9% of the vote, significantly more than their competing proposal that they put forward in order to deflect support from our proposal. Last year, management's proposal was advisory. This year, they're doing a binding 5% bylaw. So we want to be successful with our proposal and defeat their proposal. I think that's a significant one. And then another company that's on been brought to our attention, a significant focus company, is Bed Bath & Beyond, which is on there because of excessive executive compensation. We haven't yet heard from them. We may still, but and then there are a set of companies that enacted 5% bylaws where we've put in proposals, both some binding, some not, to try and amend downward. And those tend to be some smaller energy companies, Noble Energy, Cabot. Those are some of the priorities. Am I missing any that would stand out?
I think that covers it.
I'd also mention, we're continuing to engage on EEO1 disclosure, diversity disclosure, and political spending. And there are, we've quietly withdrawn 2 political disclosure proposals and 1 EEO1 proposal. Capital One on EEO1, and then PPL and Eversource.
That's correct. Yeah.
So, all of which will be in the postseason report we'll talk about in the fall. To come back to your question, the end of I don't know the number, we're at 212. I think companies that were going to enact in advance of proxy season have probably done it to hold off the votes. So I think you'll see another wave come summer or fall, maybe in response to votes this year. I think it was a torrent in November, December, January. I think it's slowed significantly for now.
And statistically, I think it's about a third of the large cap, the S&P 500 right now. So there's a sense in the community that critical mass has been achieved. And some boards might be testing the winds a little bit if they can wait another year. But generally, far less controversial than a year ago.
And
Is there any indication that as a result of passage of these bylaws that there have been moves towards independent voter nominations? Is there any anecdotal or?
No, I think that as a first step, I think investors are figuring out how to engage more directly on board composition. And I said this in various settings, but I probably haven't said it in here. If you think about it, I know you've been close to the evolution of governance. We've historically been all about independence and accountability, and I think that the discussion has now shifted that those are necessary but not sufficient, and it's board quality. Is it the right mix of directors given the company's business strategy and risks? And so I think investors and working collaboratively and in groups to engage boards, right? And we are on climate competence and diversity. And you know, we've represented to portfolio companies that we don't expect it to be used broadly, and I think that's true. It's not. It would be very difficult for us to use. We also hope it gets tested at some point and doesn't become purely symbolic.
But even having it as an advantage, the companies know that that it's a possibility, so they would implement the right procedures to hire the right, to nominate the right directors, to avoid any of that potentiality. I hope that it really prods them to take a good look at themselves.
And to be more open when investors talk to them, if not about individual candidates, although possibly, but certainly about the characteristics of candidates. And board refreshment, the tenure is getting longer and longer. By the way, assuming we get the printer working, I have a short press packet I was going to distribute of recent press on proxy access diversity. So these are just some recent stories, all of which I think in some way reference our collective work.
I saw a piece today about Twitter letting go 2 white guys and putting on a couple more diverse candidates, and says there's more to come. So in terms of...
So Silicon Valley is certainly under a lot of scrutiny. And Twitter, didn't they have a CEO transition recently as well? So there's been some, I know, some change. But...
Do they do that of their own volition, as it were, or what they?
Well, I think they do
singled
come under
out?
pressure and scrutiny, as Mike said.
I would assume so, but I just wanted to...
Yeah, and so, but I don't know, I'm not in it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's reflected in the updated guidelines, and we've taken a slightly, I think, nuanced and approach, but if a board does not adequately refresh itself or have adequate diversity, you know, under some circumstances, circumstance specifically may withhold from the corporate governance committee of the board if they're not constantly, you know, continually bringing on new directors and diverse directors. Were the 2 men they were removing?
Yes, 2 white men.
How about some women being put on?
One was a woman and one was a person of color or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think they had like an all-white, all-male board or something like that.
So I mentioned the CalPERS change, and I quickly referenced a meeting, but just, you know, we did help convene a meeting that was in connection with the UN Investor Summit, where we had elected fiduciaries and some of the biggest pension funds in the world to talk about about investors and climate change, but it was really to talk about board oversight of these risks and board composition, because the day before at the Investor Summit, it was a lot about how you allocate money around addressing climate change, and you know, there's a lot of discussions around investments, but there's a growing push to really, we're in part a leader of, to elevate the discussion into the boardroom of these companies. So it's part of, I think, our relationship building. There's a good group. You know, the French ambassador to the UN is interested because France has a big stake coming out of the Paris Agreement. So co-convened and used his relationships to bring non-U.S. investors to the table. And there's a follow-up meeting in early April that the French ambassador is convening. So we continue to try and build those relationships. On the diversity front, just a couple quick things. We co-signed a petition to the SEC about a year ago asking for a matrix disclosure on boards that would require, among other things, that the companies identify the gender and race self-identified of board members. Because today we don't really know. You look at names, you look at pictures, but it's not something you can easily track. Gender is easier than racial diversity. And there's been some recent press reports that Chair White may be, she's certainly favorably inclined on the issue, and whether this is specifically the formulation she's going to go with, we don't know. And we did have well, I'll leave it at that, it's for a public session. We are also convening, we're actually hosting, but I would give leadership credit to the UAW Retired Medical Benefits Trust. Next month, convene here in the Controller's office a group of investors and executive search firms around, we're going to push them to adopt a voluntary code whereby when they go out to do a search for directors or senior executives, that they include diverse candidates in that pool. And there's some interest in the industry. There are such codes that, in the UK market, I think that this is being modeled after. So the UAW has helped to convene this group.
I think some of the major sports leagues have something similar to that.
Well, there's the Rooney Rule.
The Rooney Rule,
In
right?
football, and we actually, NICER's proposals, we've done that before, that you have to include diverse candidates. And we've filed proposals at companies and gotten that into nominating committee charters, where the committee has to include diverse candidates in the pool from which they pick directors. They don't have to pick them, and it's been very successful in integrating the head coach and the lead in the front office at the NFL. And there was a story a couple of years ago in Forbes that not only paid off in terms of increasing diversity, but the teams that tended to be more diverse appeared in the Super Bowl quite frequently. So there was a performance payoff.
It's a car mission.
Wow. You mentioned CII. That was on my list. Thank you. One other, just as a heads up, we've been asked to contemplate signing on to a called an equivalent of what they have in the UK, a voluntary stewardship code. It's a corporate governance principles that some investors, institutional and asset owners, asset managers and owners, as well as potentially issuers would sign on to. I think it's very straightforward and completely consistent with our guidelines, but I think it would be more meaningful once we get there to have the funds on rather than just the controller's office, so we may come back to you for a formal authorization. It's really, it's fairly straightforward. I think it will serve us well in holding companies that are unresponsive accountable.
You have some text or code that you can send it.
When we get there, we certainly will.
Did you want to mention PRI?
I'm sorry?
PRI?
Do we have that here now? Yes, since we're in public session. So, at the request of a trustee, Rebecca did quite a bit of work on this. Jimmy Yan, who's not here, I'm on my team. The last couple of weeks have been completing the NICER's PRI submission, which is, Ray was able to negotiate an extension till today, and we want to submit it today. I understand not a lot of time to review, but I want to make sure everyone's comfortable, and by the end of the day, we can submit it.
A mere 68 pages.
Great.
So as you recall, we've been participating in this for quite some time, and Ray was very involved in spearheading our continued participation in this. So,
This is a tremendous effort. We're really, on behalf of NICER's and my own personal thanks and my organization's personal thanks. Thank you and your staff so much, and Jimmy as well for all your hard work. This is just a tremendous amount of work. NICER's doesn't have a staff that can do it. I don't have a staff that can do it, but your team really stepped in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And I know, as we've discussed, much of this, a lot of the reporting is on the work that we do on NICER's behalf, and we want to support your participation in PRI. So we're happy to be helpful and support your participation however we can.
and I think this just speaks volumes about we have demonstrated to our peers time and time again our commitment to ESG factors and proxy voting, proxy access, and all of these things. It's great that we participate in these surveys to let the rest of the world know that we're an active fund, we're involved in these things. These are things that matter to our members and matter to us. And I think that every once in a while when we get these opportunities to fill out these surveys and let the rest of the world know what we're doing is a great thing, and I'm appreciative to Mike and his team for getting this done, because God knows I don't have the wherewithal to figure it all out, so. Thank you.
Now, the meeting, there's an annual meeting?
On April 14th.
Yes, on the afternoon of our NYSER's regular meeting.
And we will have somebody go to the meeting?
So, I think several people maybe, I'm expecting to go, the various conflicts that day keep cropping up, but I will be there at least for some of the time, as much as I
Yeah,
can.
good.
I'm not going to the dinner, but I'm going to go during the day.
It might not be a bad thing to do, though, to go to the dinner and talk to other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Their annual, that's actually like the 10th anniversary
10th
celebration.
anniversary.
So their annual dinner this year is actually in Singapore. Right, so I went to the annual meeting last year, I'm not going this year, I'll tell you that.
That's a hike.
I just want to
Singapore.
on behalf of the Public Advocates Office, we hear so often, people ask, how are you integrating ESG into investments? You hear it amongst other asset managers and holders, and public clients across the country, because a lot of them don't know how to do it. And I think by filling these things out and explaining it, I know we just got it, but reviewing the commentary involved, I think it gives a roadmap for some folks of how would you implement a good ESG program and how to integrate it, which is really tough in a lot of systems. They just don't have the wherewithal and the ability. So this is really good, and hopefully this will get pushed out to other funds. And I know PIRI puts very aggregates information.
Yeah, a subset of this will be public, some is private,
Right.
and I think it should, and I think next year, this is fiscal 2015. There'll be even, I think, more things to talk about fiscal 2016. The board, I know, has approved several resolutions on climate. I think some of the work we're approving here with respect to the engagement program. So, I welcome the board's commitment to transparency.
So with that, if that's, if you're done with the public session, I think it'd be appropriate to move into executive session, and then if there's other topics we want to talk about after that we want to do in public, we could certainly go back out.
I move that we exit public session and move into executive session.
So it is, we're going into executive session. Okay, so thank you. So we've just entered back into public session. We'll ask Mike Gallen to report out of the matters that were before the committee.
Great, thank you, John. So during executive session, we discussed a procurement issue and a related proposed change to the investment policy statement, and the committee endorsed a recommendation that will be put forward to the full board at its May meeting.
So thank you. With that, unless there's any other items, we'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
We're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.